Hello, Year 10, and welcome to the How to Answer Question 6 on the America paper. So the question skeleton for question 6. Which of the following was something? X or Y? Explain your answer with reference to both. So question 6 on the American paper will always look like this. You're just not sure what's going to be in the gaps. I'm going to show you some examples in a moment. Here's your first example. Which of the following areas of American life saw more change during the 1920s? The economy or society? Explain your answer with reference to both. This question is an example of change and continuity. If you watched the How to Answer Question 4 on the Cold War exam, you will remember me talking about these historical ideas. This one is a question about change. Which of these areas changed more? Which just continued being the same, and which changed more? Was it the economy that changed more in the 1920s, or was it society that changed more? Okay. Question 2. Example number 2. Which of the following had the greater impact on America in the 1920s? Was it organized crime, or was it the Red Scare? Explain your answer with reference to both. This question includes the word impact, so therefore we should be thinking of consequence. So which of these was of more consequence in America in the 1920s? Organized crime or the Red Scare? Which of these two things had a greater impact? Explain your answer with reference to both. Example number 3. Which group experienced more change during the 1920s? Was it women or was it African Americans? Explain your answer with reference to both. We can see the word change, so we know that this word is change or continuity. Example number 4. Which of the following was more of an important reason for the result of the 1932 election? Was it Hoover's emphasis on rugged individualism? Or was it Roosevelt's promise of the 3 R's? Explain your answer with reference to both. Now, in this question, we see the word reason. When we see the word reason, we can understand that this question is asking us which was more of an important cause. Was it X, Hoover's emphasis on rugged individualism, or was it Y, Roosevelt's promise of the 3 R's? Example number 5. Which of the following is more important for getting America out of the Great Depression? Was it Roosevelt's New Deal, or was it Americans' decision to join World War II? This one is cause. Which one of these caused America to come out of the Great Depression? Which group experienced more change during World War II? Was it women or African Americans? This question is clearly focusing on the idea of change and continuity. Which of the following had more impact on post-war America? Was it McCarthyism or changes in popular culture? Explain your answer with reference to both. We see the word impact, so we know that this question is asking us about consequence. And then the last example, move myself up there. Which of the following played more of a role in bringing about improved civil rights for African Americans? Was it Martin Luther King and the NVDA movement, the non-violent direct action movement, or was it the Black Power movement? Explain your answer with reference to both. Now, a role in bringing about. This, if you think about it carefully, a role in bringing about is language which implies that this question is about cause. All right. Which one of these things caused the civil rights movement to progress more? Was it the non-violent movement of Martin Luther King, or was it the violent Black Power movement? Explain your answer with reference to both. So these are just some examples of what this question might or might not look like. There is no right answer. Okay, it's X or Y. You can choose X or Y, but you just have to be able to explain it. All right. Remember these C's. Try and think about which one of these the question is getting you to focus on. Is it change and continuity? Is it consequences, or is it cause? Cause, why something happened. Consequence, what happened as a result of something. And then change and continuity, whether something actually changed very much or not, or whether it stayed the same. Okay? Right. This is, we'll ignore this slide, please. This should not be here. Let's ignore that. So, in terms of the America exam question number 4, the advice and the tips are very similar. In fact, pretty much identical for the advice that I gave to you on the previous video about answering question 4 on the Cold War paper. The skills that you need to demonstrate are very, very similar. They are essay questions where you have to give an opinion and explain it. And the first thing you need to do is you need to form an opinion, because if you do not have an opinion, your answer will not be good. So you must form an opinion. Which one do you think was more something? Was it X or Y? Like I said earlier, there's no right answer, but you must choose X or Y. Tip number 2, once you have formed your opinion, you need to be able to form an argument. In other words, you need to be able to explain why you have that opinion, because an opinion without a reason is meaningless. An opinion with a reason, on the other hand, is a powerful piece of writing. Okay? So opinion and argument. Tip number 3, all right? And again, this goes for the essay question for Cold War as well, but it applies to America too. You have to prove your opinion / argument. You need to select evidence that proves your argument, because an argument without evidence is unconvincing. An argument with evidence is convincing. Imagine that you are a lawyer and that the marker is a judge. All right? The judge needs evidence. Okay? And that evidence must be detailed and precise and specific. The evidence that you include should include dates, events, the names of people, the names of places, even better, statistics. Okay? The more detail that you give in your evidence, the more convincing your argument becomes, because an argument without evidence is not convincing. Tip number 4, you must look at the other side of the argument. It is not enough just to look at X or just to look at Y. You must, as it says in the question, explain your answer with reference to both. It is therefore important to look at more than one factor. All right, and in this case, for the American paper, there are 2 factors. You only need to look at the ones that are in the question, but to get the top marks, you must look at both. This is because looking at more than one factor makes your answer balanced and open-minded, and balanced and open-minded history is good history. Okay, history that only looks at one side of the argument is narrow-minded and therefore not as strong, and therefore that will get lower marks. Tip number 5, although you need to look at the other side of the argument, you must never forget the argument that you are trying to make. One mistake that students often make is they start looking at the other side of the argument in their essay, and then as a result of doing that, they change their mind from their introduction. You must not do that. You must be able to accept that the question could be answered in a different way, that there are alternative theories that could be offered for the question, but that in spite of that, you still maintain the argument that you set out in your introduction. The argument that you set out in your introduction must run throughout the entire answer. Remember what I said last time, it is the spine of your essay. Do not change your mind, all right? This makes your writing consistent and therefore more convincing. Tip number 6, Okay, same as before for the Cold War essay, your answer must be organized and divided into paragraphs. Do not write one giant blob of information. Divide your writing into paragraphs because this makes your essay flow. So these are your 6 tips. Okay, opinion, argument, evidence, balance, consistency, and structure. If your essay contains these things, you will get a good mark. Here is the table for how to structure your essay. I'm not going to go through this in detail now. You can download the PowerPoint off Show My Homework and look at this yourself. But this tells you what each paragraph should focus on, which of the tips should appear in that paragraph, and the checklist of things that you need to do in this paragraph. Let's look at an example. Which group experienced more change during World War II? Was it women or was it African Americans? Was it X or Y? In this case, women or African Americans. Explain your answer with reference to both. So we must talk about both of these things in the answer. We must discuss how World War II impacted women, and we must discuss how World War II impacted African Americans. But as I have said, you must make a decision on which one it impacted more. Which of these groups experienced more change? And I repeat, there is no right answer. There is no answer that the marker is looking for. They are simply want to read answers that have a convincing and logical and supported argument. And I'm going to show you an example now of an answer which does that to this question. So here would be an introduction. I believe that African Americans experienced more change during World War II. This is because the change that impacted women was temporary, whereas the effects of the war on the way Americans viewed African Americans were permanent. So in this introduction, you can see the opinion, African Americans experience more change, and you can see the argument. This is because the change that impacted African Americans was permanent. Now, you might disagree with that. And if you disagree with that, that's absolutely fine. But this is an acceptable introduction. Next paragraph, you need to now prove your argument. At the beginning of World War II, African Americans faced discrimination in the workplace. One aircraft maker, for example, employed only 10 African Americans out of a total workforce of 30,000. In response, Roosevelt created the Fair Employment Practice Committee, the FEPC. The FEPC recommended that companies change their policies towards African Americans. As a result, 1 million African Americans fought in the war, and although at first they were only able to serve in kitchens and they were not allowed to serve as pilots, gradually these obstacles started to break down. For example, the Air Force eventually allowed African Americans to serve as pilots, and black officers became common. These changes can be seen as permanent due to the fact that Truman officially ended segregation in the army in 1948. Can you see here how I am referring back in this section here to the argument that I set out in the introduction? This allows my argument to be a spine throughout my essay. My argument is consistent. I am referring back to that argument. You must do that, all right? Do not lose sight of your argument. In the next paragraph now, we're going to look at the other side of the argument. Conversely, changes for women were more temporary. Women's role in the economy certainly grew as a result of World War II. The number of working women rose from 12 to 19 million between 1940 and 1945. For example, in 1939, there were only 36 women working in the shipbuilding industry, but by 1942, that number had grown to 200,000. This shows that the war meant that women were needed to do the jobs that they had never done before, giving them more influence and power in society. However, this word is really important, Year 10, because it signals that you are returning to your overall argument. However, when the war ended and many of the men returned, the women lost these jobs and went back to their usual roles of housewife or working in traditional female industries, such as a secretary. This shows that the change for women, though significant during the war, reversed when it ended. Again, I am referring back to my overall argument. My overall argument runs consistently throughout the essay. Final paragraph. In conclusion, it can be seen that African Americans experienced more change as a result of World War II due to the fact that the impact continued to grow and even directly impact the White House after the war had finished, while for women, the changes did not last and were reversed once the war ended. So this model answer here contains all of the ingredients of a very good answer to question 4 on the American paper. It's not long. In this model answer, I have not written lots and lots and lots of information, but this would still be considered a level 4 answer for the reason that it has a clear and consistent argument and that it is backed up by precise supporting evidence. Look again at this model answer. Look at all the numbers. Look at the names. Roosevelt, Fair Employment Practice Committee, Truman. Look at the dates, 1948, 1940 to 1945, 1939. And most importantly, year 10, look at the statistics. 1 million African Americans fought in the war. In 1939, there were only 36 women working in the shipbuilding industry, but by 1942, that number had grown to 200,000. These statistics are incredibly precise and detailed. One mistake that students often make is that they do not bring in that detail. Instead of giving a statistic, a student might say at the beginning of the war, there were very few women in work, but by the end of the war, there were millions of women in work. Now, that is true. Okay, that is true, but you will get far less credit for it because you are not supporting it with a specific and precise statistic. Okay, so look at the evidence that has been included in this answer to support the argument. It is precise and detailed. It contains dates, events, people, places, and statistics. The more of those, which we call DEPs, dates, events, people, places, and statistics, that you can get into your writing, the more credit you will be given. So this question is out of 12. Level 1 is 1 to 3 marks, level 2 is 4 to 6, level 3 is 7 to 9, and level 4 is 10 to 12. Okay, it is the question with the joint most marks. The most marks on the American paper. Okay, so it may be a very good idea when completing an exam on America to do this question first, because it is the essay question. This question holds the most marks. So although it is question 6, you are free to do this question first. That's your choice. Okay, just go to the part in the question booklet that has this question. All right. So here's the mark scheme. Okay. If you get all of these 6 things in, you will be successful. Now, this mark scheme here is slightly different. I'm going to change that for the presentation that you will be able to download off Show My Homework. Okay. You will see that when you open up the presentation in PowerPoint. So the next steps, just as before, the only way that you can get better at this question is to practice it. These essays are difficult, so practice, practice, practice as many of the examples on slide 3 as you can. If once you've done all of them, try and come up with some more, or ask your teacher to help you to give you some more examples of these questions. And if you send them to your teachers, okay, they will happily mark it for you. You just need to email it to them asking for feedback. All right. Just as before, humility is the name of the game. You will not get better at these questions until you practice them. This advice is important, and hopefully you have found this presentation useful. But the next step now is to go away and write as many of them as you can. The more you do, the more of an expert you will become at answering these questions. I hope you found this video on how to answer question 6 on the American paper useful. All right. Please do get in touch with feedback on these videos if you would like. All right. We're always willing to hear your opinion. Otherwise, thank you and goodbye for now.